All right, welcome to the TransTalk Hub podcast. My name is Alyssa. Here
And
we have,
I'm Al.
welcome Al, welcome Al. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Of course. Happy to be here. Very excited.
Yeah, me too. Today we're going to start things off talking about trans bathroom access, and we'll kind of go into the ins and out of that. So, I guess if I were to ask, what are your thoughts?
That's a lot. That's a very small question, and the answer is very, very long. If there even is a good answer, a good solid consensus. And like as we kind of discussed earlier before the recording, that like it's not a simple answer, you know? Um I think it depends on, again, like I said before the podcast, we had the same conclusions, but we got there in very different ways. And there's a lot of things to consider on that journey there, you know?
That's true. Absolutely. Well, I guess we'll start from this angle and we'll go from there because I know we talked about this and I think that's kind of where we started. Before we kind of decided to pop on here for this topic. So obviously, passability looks different for everybody, um, but I think especially for people outside the community, I think that is a big thing, and I think even for us, it is to an extent. I think from my end, I think definitely you should at least put effort into it. I get, like I said, passability is very different for everybody, but I think most of the time, if people can see you're putting in effort, you're also not looking for things like heading to a woman's space right off the bat. They want to transition, weekend to transition, etc. I think you should look into other spaces like family restrooms, gender neutral restrooms, things like that. But in the sense of passability, if you're going to go into a women's space, I think you should put in the effort first.
So I think at its core, the whole bathroom debate is about passability, and which makes it so much more complicated because I think when people hear it, especially people who are, uh, might be cis or might not be an ally of any kind, might be like, well, of course, like you're not a woman, so don't use the women's bathroom. Like, if we're talking from a strictly linguistical stance, don't use the bathroom if that's not who you are. But when you talk about passing, all these philosophical questions kind of come up that trans people ask themselves all the time. For a cis person, it's like, well, you don't look like a woman to me, so you shouldn't be in the women's bathroom. But for us, passing it's a goal, but whether or not you actually ever reach that goal is debatable. It's one of those things where it's like it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. Because, you might look at me and you might say, "Oh, you pass very well." Whereas I may look at me and say, "Well, I actually don't think I pass very well." Perfect example is, people who are watching this on YouTube, they can see me. People who are not, they're listening to this in the car on whatever platform they're on. You can just hear my voice, and I'm guessing those two crowds are probably having very different experiences right now. Um, so when I use the women's bathroom, which I've been doing for quite a while now, I do tend not to strike up conversation unless someone like directly addresses me. And honestly, in those situations where they have directly addressed me, it's been a very supportive place. The women's bathroom is a very supportive place, in my experience. Mostly just night out on the town. Everyone's checking their makeup, having a good time, and everyone's usually very complimentary. There's a interesting sisterhood I've found there. especially with just like random strangers that I've never met before. But I know that's not everyone's experience, and I do live. I live in Connecticut, where things are probably a little more liberal than many other places in the country. Um, Now, the whole passing thing, that's a hurdle we try to jump literally every day of our lives. From the moment that we start transition, it's like, when am I going to pass? That's because that's like the ultimate goal, I feel like, for a lot of trans women, right? Like, when am I going to pass? And it's an amorphous answer because it's so different for everyone. Like I said, we might look at the same person and be like, they passed, they don't. And then all these other questions come up like, well, when do I pass? Who gets to decide if I pass? And what does passing actually entail? Like, if you get to the heart of it, passing, unfortunately, in today's society, passing means how much money do you have and how much time do you have. I mean, let's be honest here. I'm sure, Alyssa, like, you've probably spent a pretty penny on making sure, you're comfortable when you go out. And comfort means not just how do I feel about myself, but looking at myself from the outside. How safe do I feel? How safe do I feel going out? Um, and that means, can I buy makeup? Can I afford makeup? Um, can I afford a wig if I decide that's something I need? Can I afford femme clothes or clothes that accentuate feminine features? Um, can I afford, like, there's so many things. Like, I just had my laser appointment right before recording, and like, that's a long process and it's not exactly cheap. So there's a lot. Kind of went on a little bit of a journey there. Um, there's a lot involved, as I'm sure you'll agree, and maybe we can like educate our listeners about those things that we have to deal with and figure out solutions to as we go through transition.
For sure, absolutely. No, I think I think that's true. I don't disagree with anything you said. I think it does look different. I think it is also not like a, hey, you hit this point and you're always going to be passable. I think a lot of it is, for one, best judgment. Like, for me, if I did not have makeup on my face, if I didn't have my hair done or anything like that, I probably wouldn't go to or put myself in a position where I felt like I had to use like a woman's space. And even like for me, there is still women's spaces I just wouldn't use whatsoever. Like, for me, obviously there was well, not for me, but I'm saying like there was a situation that I think we're aware of at a Planet Fitness. But with that, for me, as a trans woman, I'm just not going to use a gym space. That's I would rather make sure that I have everything in order before I go to a gym. For me personally, I think I could just set up a gym, sort of set up in my own home, and I'd rather just do that. But if for some reason I were to change my mind, maybe I want to go to a Planet Fitness or something, me personally, I'm just not going to go to like a gym locker room for women. For me, that's personal preference. I know some trans women may say, like, well, I identify as a woman. I want to use that space. And I think that's fine if, as long as, when I said earlier, like putting in effort, really what I mean is like for me, I shave my face twice a day, in the morning and then before I go to bed. So for me, that's putting in effort, right? If I didn't, and then I want to wear makeup and all this, I'm going to be judged for that. But for me, I know I'm going to. For one, I don't want to have hair on my face anyway. I haven't started laser like yourself, and I definitely want to. So I definitely look to get into that soon. But for me, I am shaving twice a day, but I do that because I want to put the effort in, and I think some of that is I know passability is a tough topic, and it does vary in like person to person. But I think when I say putting in the effort, I think that's what that and that might look different to other people. But for me, that's shaving my face. You know, um, not every woman puts on makeup, so maybe you don't have to put on makeup before you go somewhere. For me, I will not leave the house unless I have makeup on my face. That's a personal preference. Because if I'm going to be at a spot where I need to, utilize like a female's restroom, I'm not like I want to know that because I've never had an issue, and I know also a lot of this kind of depends on where you're at. Like for me, I just learned yesterday, which is crazy. I live in Texas and didn't even know this, that it's actually illegal to use a women's restroom space if you don't have your marker changed. Now, for me, I used it all the time and I never had an issue. And I do have my marker changed now, so I guess legally I can use that space. But I've also never ran into an issue. But I think also a lot of that is the fact that I am, at least in my eyes, putting myself in a position where I'm not gonna be a disturbance or anything like that. I do exactly like what you said earlier. I avoid. Well, I don't quite know if you said you avoid conversation, but for me, I go in and I go out. I already have pre-planned. I'm going to get in here. I'm going to wash my hands and I'm going to leave. If a conversation comes to me, so be it. But I'm not going to look at someone with the idea that I want to conversate with you. I'm just no. I mean, and I think another thing too is like, especially for, just in case we have any like opposition or anything like that that's listening or watching. Um, I think also there's kind of a safety thing when we talk about like, I feel like if both you and I were to utilize like a women's, I mean, not a women's, but a men's space, we are putting ourselves at so much risk. And I don't think a lot of people even really um, think about that. They are so wound up on the hey, you shouldn't be here, because
Right.
this wasn't your space. It never will be your space. But it's like at the end of the day, we have to talk about, um, other things like safety. It's a huge
Yeah.
safety risk.
Yeah. And where where would you like us to go? Um, is a question I have, like relating to what you just said. Like, okay, you don't want us here, you know, to whoever may be listening out there, who doesn't agree with what we're saying. Then my question is to you: where should we go?
Mm.
Again, if you're listening on a podcast and you don't see me, I feel like I'm doing pretty well in my transition. I've had some surgeries. I've gone through many procedures, and I've worked on my looks and my makeup and my clothing for a long time. There's been a lot of time, effort, and money involved in that. Now, if I again, if I feel like if I keep my mouth shut, I pass. If I open my big fat mouth, maybe not. Who knows?
I feel the
But
same
the
for
question
for
is,
myself.
if okay, so you don't want me in the women's bathroom because you don't consider me a woman. I don't think men want me in the men's bathroom either. So then the question becomes, where do I go? And I mean, there's some solutions to that, which is gender neutral bathrooms, which really there aren't a ton of. Um, Even up here in the Northeast, like it's not ever really just labeled as a gender neutral bathroom. It's just like bathroom. There's one bathroom, everyone uses it, blah, blah, blah. But if there's two bathrooms, it's usually, you know, the binaries. There's hardly ever a third because whoever builds a building with three bathrooms, very occasionally there is a family restroom, but like families, are they going to want us in there as well? So where do I go? Like, I'm still a human being. I have a bladder. I gotta go somewhere, you know? So then what's your answer? where do I go? I have to go. I gotta go somewhere. Where do I go? Um, so to go back to a point, you touched on Planet Fitness, right? And I think that's a very topical subject because that's what's happening right now. Um, Planet Fitness has had some time in the headlines, and I think the first one was the woman who snapped a photo of a trans woman in a bathroom, and then the cis woman who snapped that photo had her membership revoked because and Planet Fitness didn't say anything about like it's because it's a trans person. Like they weren't necessarily taking our side because we're trans. They were saying like that strictly goes against our rules. There's no photography in the locker room whatsoever for obvious reasons, regardless of whether you're in the men's locker room or the women's locker room. I think it's very obvious. You don't take photos of other people in bathrooms. That's creepy and a little unhinged, frankly. So then there was a huge blow up from people who don't like us. They were considering this woman was doing her job. You know, she was protecting the public. She was reporting that there was a man in the women's locker room. And then there was a big blow up, and they were talking about their, stock prices falling. I don't know if you heard about the bomb threats that happened. Oh, well, Alyssa is shaking her head no. So there were bomb threats for numerous Planet Fitness across the country. In fact, there were some literally just like the next town over. Didn't happen to my Planet Fitness, but there were a few in my state where that happened. Um, but like, I walked in the next day, like, like nothing happened, no issues. Never been any issues whatsoever at my Planet Fitness. But like, that's the level that we're at right now. That's the response that we're at is like, oh my God, like, okay, so Planet Fitness is allowing men to go into women's locker rooms. We got to do something. And bomb threats is apparently what they came up with that as a solution. Um, and I actually happen to know someone that works for Planet Fitness, and I asked them about what's going on here. What's Planet Fitness's stance? And they said unequivocally they are not budging on their stance. They do not care about stock. And this is not just like an employee. This is someone who is in management. So I trust what they say. Now, who knows if stock prices tumble? They may change their stance, but for now, that's where we're at. Now, my own experience there is well, it kind of leads back to transition equals money. Before I went to Planet Fitness, and this was much earlier in my transition, I still wanted to go to a gym. And in my town, there's a very, very nice gym. It's in kind of like the rich, hip part of town. It is an independent gym. It's not a chain. And it's about $100 a month. But I had been there before transition, and I knew what like a safe, inclusive place it was. Zero issues, never had anything there. In fact, I was welcomed with open arms. They loved seeing me there. And I also saw other trans women there. And I went there for a while, but honestly, it just became it's $100 a month. That's not nothing. It was a very nice gym, very clean, very safe, lots of amenities, but still $100 a month for a gym is a hard pill to swallow. So I stopped for a while. I was focusing on transition. And when I decided to get back to the gym, I was like, we're going to try Planet Fitness. It's right down the road. And at that point, I didn't have any of my surgeries. I had not had FFS. I had not had breast augmentation. But felt I was doing okay. I felt I was doing pretty well, Um, but I did ask them beforehand, straight up. I called them up and I was like, "What is your inclusion policy for the women's locker room. And they said, however you identify and whatever you are comfortable with is the locker room you should use. And if you have any issues, tell us. And I was like, okay, I think that's pretty damn good for a chain gym, which basically I believe it is the most popular chain gym in the country as far as I know.
Yeah, as far
Um,
as I know as well.
yeah. So, I walked in and I'll be honest, the first couple months I was there, I did not use the women's locker room. Um, because I was a little afraid. And because it's not like a normal bathroom, like if you're out in the town, you got to go use the bathroom. You go in and use the bathroom. The locker room's a little different because you're not just going to the bathroom. You might be getting changed. You might be like if it's winter, taking off a coat or putting things like a purse in a locker, um, or like preening yourself in the mirror. The locker room's a little different in those cases. But um, I started going with a friend, and we went to the locker room together because I was a little freaked out. And she's like, no, 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 I'll come with you. And sure enough, yeah, we did. And we used the locker room for a while. And everything everything was fine. And I work out there now all the time, multiple times a week. People at the front desk are, fine. Some of them are super friendly, some of them are indifferent. I get it. It's not the highest paying or most exciting job. But I'll take indifference over hate any day of the week. I just want to be treated like anyone else who's going to the gym. None of us love being there, but we got to go. Um, and I've used the locker room there now for 5 months. Zero issues. I get the occasional stare, but I also get stares out on the floor. Like, I'm tall. I got big boobs. Like, people stare for multiple reasons, and it's not always just because, oh, you're trans. Or they're trying to like figure me out. And the interactions I've had on the gym floor have always been nice and polite. Occasionally people come up and they're just asking about like, oh, are you using this? Okay, great. But like, it was just like 2 weeks ago, I had this old lady come up to me who had to be at least 70. She comes up to me, I'm doing squats, and she says, I had like my ear pods in, so she said something. I pulled it out. I'm like, I'm sorry, what? And she's like, I hope to have a body like you when I grow up. And I was like, oh my God, that is so sweet, especially coming from like, this old lady who like, who knows? Who knows if she even knew I was trans? I mean, I assume she figured it out after I opened my mouth. But like there was no surprise on her face. There was no look of disgust. It was just like I said thank you, and I was like filled with euphoria. I had a little party with myself in the car afterwards. Um, so I think I forget exactly the point I was trying to make there, but I'll make a point now. I think there is a lot of focus on the negative. The news cycle is always about the negative. You're only going to hear about the negative. You're only going to hear about this Planet Fitness ordeal. You're never going to hear about trans woman gets complimented by kindly old lady at the gym. You're never going to hear about the people that accept us. You're always going to hear about the people who don't. And I think because the news cycle is so loud and because there's a very vocal minority out there, people assume that most people are against us when my reality is that that's simply not true. Yeah, there's a vocal minority out there. I feel like the majority of people do not care. Now, I will admit, I do live in a little bit of a bubble. Um, so my experience differs. I'm sure differs from someone who lives in Texas like you do. Like we live in very different states in very different climates for trans people. But all I can do is base it on my experience that I have encountered very little in the way of someone who is just like, just unprovoked, just been like, "You're a man," and I'm just like, "Oh, you think so? Because I think you're outvoted." Like, I've never heard that before, but okay, like, I'm not going to try and change your mind.
Yeah, for sure. No, first off, I think that's wonderful that you got that compliment. I mean, that had to feel so good, especially coming from an elder. You know,
I
like
know.
we generally, I think at least a majority of people seem to think that like most elders are against us. I mean, most of them. I mean, sure. I mean, like, trans people have always existed. You know, like what the first documented surgery was in I think 1970. But you know, there are more of us coming out now, so it's becoming, I guess, a little bit more quote unquote normal. We're still fighting a fight, but it's getting more normalized slowly, bit by bit. But I think something like that is good, and I think you're absolutely right that like there's not enough positive information out there where people are hearing. We are getting like complimented. I talked a little bit about the fact that I don't personally enjoy having a conversation if I go into a women's space, but there was a point where unintentionally I had to. I had an older woman as well who was speaking to me and was basically asking me a general question. She was just like, "Hey, how are you?" And I was like, "Oh no," because like for me,
Oh
I
God.
feel I feel with my voice, and I'm sure people who might not be watching the video side of this and are hearing the audio, they're like, "Yeah, I don't know how to feel about that voice there." But I mean, for me, and I'm well aware my voice is not like traditionally passable, but and I know that like typically if I'm going to talk to somebody where I think they're going to question me, I will up my pitch a bit. I do have a register that I'd like to go into. Here on the podcast, I'm keeping it very real, very raw. So I'm not going to like try to put on a voice that's not me.
Mm-hmm.
Because while I can go to that register, for one, it's not very comfortable. Second of all, I only use it for those instances. And for that was a case where I had to use it, and I don't think she knew whatsoever. She asked me how my day was. I told her it was great. How about you? We had a very 2 to 3 minute long conversation, but it was good. I didn't get clocked per se, or anything like that, and I think it was a good experience. Now, did that still make me want to have conversations in there? Absolutely not, because my heart was beating outside of my chest. But I would say it was an overall good experience. I thought, oh my God, she's gonna know, you know, I wanted to get out of there anyway. But I think for me that was what I can recall to be a good experience. It sounds like you had a good experience, at the gym with that woman who spoke with you. So I think that's very good, and I think that's like for me. Sure, like when we talk about the bathroom issue, there's a lot of negative parts to all of that, but there's also positives. We just spoke about two things. I spoke about like a actual bathroom interaction for me. You spoke about an interaction for you that basically still kind of pertains to the same thing. It wouldn't really matter if you were in a bathroom or on the gym floor. It would still basically be the same thing. She could have caught you at either place. You know what I mean? So I think that's good to kind of recognize. And I think for anyone listening or watching, I think um, I think it'll probably be nice for them to kind of have that, to kind of keep in their head when they think about this whole thing. And um, another thing that you kind of talked about was men don't even want us in the like mouth spaces. 100%, that's true, because that is a liability for them. It's not only a liability for us on a safety end, but it's a liability for call outs. you know if someone says like, oh, I don't, I don't know, maybe we can have some sort of like, questionnaire for a certain group of men at some point. I don't know, but I would like to think that if you asked them and said, "Hey, would you be okay with a trans woman in your space?" I honestly feel like if they're not like having any sort of peer or family like interaction within their answer, I feel like they would say no because there's the possibility of SA, um, happening. There is a lot of different things that can be called out on them, and obviously it's a safety thing for us because we feel like maybe there would be no issues, but how are we to know that? I think most of us, obviously, you can't speak for a whole community because there's bad people within all communities. However, I do think the majority of us have good intentions if we are to utilize like a woman's space or something like that. But I think for me, I am always going to try to utilize certain things like family restrooms, gender neutral spaces. There's literally an app as well called Refuge Bathrooms that you can use. And let's just say you're traveling, right? You're going to an area you have no idea what kind of bathroom they're going to have. Um, Obviously, gas stations are rough because generally they don't have those spaces. So you would have to prepare and know, hey, if I'm going to travel, um, am I in the position where I think I can walk in there and not like have eyes on me or whatever, or be any sort of disturbance. I think for that you got to kind of pre-plan and do what you got to do on that end. But you can utilize something like the apps to know like, hey, is this because I know most Targets have a gender neutral restroom or a family restroom to my knowledge, but the one near me does not. It's a general like uh, male and females restroom. So for me, yeah, I have no issue. So I still do utilize the women's space in that particular Target. I hardly ever go, but if I do go, I will use it. But I'll also make sure that I feel like I'm in a position where um, I'm not going to like raise any red flags or anything like that. And obviously, I don't try to speak. I feel like if I don't speak, I generally have no issues. As soon as I open my mouth, it's over for me if I don't utilize my other pitch. Um, so yeah, I think it's a pretty um, expansive sort of topic on its own. But I think that a lot of the conversation is like you said, where do you want us to go? If we weren't to utilize a women's restroom, where do you want us? Because men don't want us in there. Um, like you said as well. What about families? We could be taking up that restroom, and somebody who really, really needs that space. It's the only space they can utilize because maybe it's like accessibility friendly, and it's the only one that is accessibility friendly. Because most, to my experience, most family restrooms are generally like a accessibility friendly one, and so for me, I'm taking away from those people when I utilize a space like that, and I don't intend to do that. But also, if there is a space, I generally will use that to just not cause an issue at all. But I do partially feel bad, utilizing that space as well, knowing that somebody behind me might need it more than I do in the sense of like the accessibility reasons.
So we've mostly been talking about this from like a trans point of view because we are. That's what we are, and that's our experience. But I would hope that our audience isn't just trans. I would hope that there's some allies listening. And I know this is going to sound strange, but I do hope that there are people who maybe have never even met a trans person are listening, or people who don't like trans people for whatever reason. Um, so I think that a I think we should address those people. Um, because again, like I'm in a bubble, but it's not like I don't have the internet. I know what some demographics are saying about us. So going back to Planet Fitness, um, there was an initial story about the woman who photographed a trans woman. Then just recently, a few days ago, there was a story of a cis man entering a women's bathroom and just started taking off his clothes. I forget exactly what state that happened in. Not really relevant. But it's been interesting looking at those articles, because depending on what website you go to, some will say man enters women's bathroom and, derobes. Some other websites will say man identifying as woman goes into women's bathroom and derobes. And there's very different connotations with either of those headlines. One is basically like, well, yeah, obviously this is a cis man who, for some reason, decided it would be a good idea to just say, I'm a woman, and go into a women's locker room and just start flashing everyone. Now, if you don't know what this person looks like, you just got to go online. And this is an interesting question, because we were talking about passing, because bathroom access, let's be honest, is the story of passing. And you look at the mugshots and it's like, this is obviously a man. This is a masculine presenting person. Sure, I don't know what's in their pants. I don't care. But you look at this photo and it's like, this person has a beard. Like, this is obviously a man. And, he was immediately arrested, as he should be. But there's those other websites who are like, how do I say it? who are trying to pin down, like, this is a man. Whereas when they say male identifying or woman identifying as man, but it's pretty obvious that this is, if you're looking at it from a very conservative view, you're looking like, oh, this is exactly what we're afraid of. This is a man pretending to be a woman entering the bathroom. Now, granted, I can't get inside this person's head, but to me, it's like, this is probably someone who is conservative trying to, like, this is activism. This is a what's the word? A challenge, so to speak, to Planet Fitness and their stance. Like, oh, well, I'm just going to identify as a woman and go in, and then that's going to, like, set everything off. But the thing is, and this is a message directly to cis people, regardless of whether you are with us or not. Men do not enter women's bathrooms unless they have, like, what this guy had. Like, he was, I would probably label him, he might have some mental illness going on. He has been whipped up into a fervor by news about us, and he thought he'd be proving a point by doing this. No, in fact, he's been arrested, and he will have a criminal record. And I guarantee you that in the weeks to come, more will come out about this person. Probably has a little bit of a criminal record, if I had to guess. But men don't enter women's bathrooms. They just don't. There's nothing for them there. And this conservative story that has been repeated, that we have to protect women from men entering the women's bathroom, it never happens. And when it does, it's stories like this. It's a cis man. It's not a femme presenting person ever. It is just a cis man going in. Now, the interesting thing about that is, when people get whipped up into a frenzy about these stories that are fictitious, about, trans women being just men who want to get into the women's bathroom. If you're afraid of trans women being in your bathroom and you think they're men, skip to the point. Like you're taking this really long route to get to the point. Skip to the point. You're afraid of men. You're not afraid of trans women. If you believe that a trans woman is a man in disguise who is using that disguise to gain access to the women's restroom, then you are, if you just get straight to the point, you skip the disguise, you're afraid of men. And from actual reports of men being in women's bathrooms, which usually almost always involves SA, I don't blame you for being afraid of men. I would never, at this point, I would never, ever step in a men's bathroom ever again. Like, that is something I have, I think, frankly, like, I mean, yes, I am a woman, regardless of what your opinion may be, listener. But like, I definitely don't belong in the men's bathroom anymore, period. Frankly, for my safety. Um, which leads me into something that came up in my life recently. I wanted to go on a road trip. I currently am uh, unemployed. I'm currently full time. Full time. I lack full time employment. Let's say that. Um, and I wanted to take a road trip down to Tennessee to visit a good friend who lives down there. And if I live in Connecticut, I got to go through some states to get there. And you can do that trip all at once. It would be a long trip. But I had to sit there and think about, where is it going to be safe for me to stop? I had to like look at the maps, look at the climate, the political climate in all these states that I pass through. And if I live in Connecticut, like I could probably stop in Delaware and not have to really worry about anything. Maybe Maryland, somewhere around there. Maybe like Washington D.C. But after that, probably going to be a long stretch for me until I reach Tennessee. And I'm like, okay, well, it's not just the bathrooms I have to worry about. It's a hotel that I might have to worry about. Um, my car's in good shape, but like, what if something happens? I have to worry about that too. Like, what if I get a flat tire? Or what if something goes wrong with my car? Or what if I get in an accident and I'm like in, like West Virginia or something? And all of a sudden I'm alone, trans woman, in a state where it's probably not safe for me to be traveling alone. Um, I used to have my job that I had actually involved me driving around the state of Connecticut a lot. That was literally like hundreds of miles a week. And I think everyone thinks Connecticut, rich, well off, you're probably safe there. You're near Massachusetts, you're near New York City, you're probably safe there. And yeah, I would say in my neck of the woods, yeah, relatively safe for trans women, but really just the shoreline. In like major metropolitan cities, the rest of the state is basically just one big forest. It's like Maine. It's like upstate New York or like Western Massachusetts or New Hampshire, blah blah blah. And you know, I had to think about, where is it safe for me to stop? All the Starbucks along the shoreline, yeah, totally. That's usually pretty safe. But sometimes I would be out in the middle of the woods. Like I'd be up near like Yukon, which is like the state school that everyone knows about because they're great at women's basketball. Um, but like up in that neck of the woods, it's the woods. Like there's nothing out there, and I would find myself up in that area, and the call of nature would hit me, and I'd be like, you know what? Unless I can find a Starbucks, I am not stopping here. I will wait until I get to like maybe like a highway Dunkin' Donuts isn't a bad choice. A highway Dunkin' Donuts, not off the highway. But this is something I had to think about on a daily basis. And I started making a mental map for myself. Like, okay, before we go way out of our way into the woods, you know what? I may not have to go to the bathroom, but we're going to stop at this Starbucks because I know it's safe there. Or we're going to stop at this Dunkin' Donuts because I know it's safe there. And that was something that I had to think about even within Connecticut. I had to think about, is this a safe bet? Again, things would probably be okay. And even if they weren't okay, I have the advantage of being rather tall. um, and maybe I could fend things off. But like, I travel with pepper gel in my purse. Never had to use it. Never come close to using it. But it's something I got to think about, especially if I'm kind of leaving the little bubble of the shoreline of Connecticut, where people are frankly too rich to really care about anything at all. I'd like to say I'm not rich. Just letting everyone know that out there.
Yeah, no, that's definitely something that we have to think about is safety, and I think that's I think maybe a good portion of like people who are outside the community might not realize that those are like very common things that we have to keep in mind if we're going to travel somewhere. Um, yeah, I mean I know kind of what we were talking about earlier. I do hope as well that like if there's anyone outside the community who's listening or watching who hasn't met a trans person, I hope you listen to this podcast and take something positively from it. Because I think for me, like I I was on like a debate TikTok or whatever, and there was one person who had never met a trans person before, and they had like a certain take, and I think once they heard like my end of it, and I kind of gave my background, my story, my experience, they completely had a different stance on everything. It was mostly the never having heard from a trans woman ever, and maybe having some friends, family members, probably some politics thrown in, who knows. But there was a lot of things that contributed to how they formed their opinion. But I think a lot of people should honestly meet or watch something from an actual trans person who's speaking on a lot of these things. There is a lot of things too that do paint us in a bad light, like what you were talking about with the person that went in and kind of derobed in the Planet Fitness. That was not a trans person, and that was a cis male who went in there to. I wouldn't think there would be anything other than to give us a bad name. I don't really know how that can be positioned in a different way. Um, and a lot of the media sees that and latches onto it, and it's like, oh, we could easily just say, this person identified as a trans woman or whatever, right? But realistically, no, it was just a cis male who went in there and did these things, and certain articles will try to attach it to our community when ideally that has nothing to do with us, nothing whatsoever. And but yet we get the backlash for it. It hurts our furthering of support, acceptance, things like that. Um, when these sort of things happen in the world. So yeah, I think, like you said too, you're not at the end of the day. If you're someone outside the community and you're worried about the bathroom situation, keep in mind what like you said, you're worried about men. Trans women are not men. We, men have no reason to go into a woman's space. They just don't. But as trans women, there is a safety risk for us going into a male space. So yes, While I said earlier that I think we can try to search for different options, like Starbucks, like you mentioned, is a great one. I think, at least in my knowledge, all Starbucks have gender neutral restrooms. So that is definitely an option. Like for me, if I was near a different space and there was a Starbucks, I'd go into Starbucks before I would even leave that place I'm in to go to that Starbucks that's near and then go use the restroom over there because I'm just avoiding a lot of it anyway, and I'm doing it for good reason. I'm doing it, to I don't think we should have to appease to a certain group of people, but I think at the end of the day, it also makes it easier for us if we just take the easy way out and say, look, I know Starbucks is a good place. Why wouldn't I just go there instead of, doing something that might cause an issue? Maybe I have to speak and someone's like, oh, that's a man. Like I personally would not want to put myself in that situation. So I think sometimes we can just take an easier route. The easier route would be going to something like a Starbucks for safety reasons. And most of it is safety reasons. We're genuine, real big emphasis on genuine, but genuine trans women are not going in there to harm anybody. Um, and I know a lot of the times too, we also get um, thrown in with like P3DOs, and we that frustrates me so much because you hear the topic where it's like, well, I don't want a man, quote unquote, in there with my 7-year-old daughter. You're painting us to be P3DOs, and we're don't get me wrong. There's bad people in every community, and so could there be someone that identifies as a trans woman or trans male or whatever that might be? Maybe, but that doesn't mean that that's our whole community. Like there's bad people in every community, and I think people need to realize that. And I think maybe one bad person does not erase all of us, because the big majority of us are doing this for the right reasons and not the wrong reasons.
Yeah. So speaking of, I guess I'll just call them NAMBLA. If people remember what NAMBLA is, like we're not NAMBLA. We're not. Um, I'm sure that there are records of men dressing as women, possibly to enter a woman's bathroom. Possibly. I don't know if there's like actual news stories out there, but like, sure. But that is someone who has some mental illness. That's what that is. Like I've heard. I actually had there's a high school, an event from high school. There was a big story in the high school when it happened. Is a high school student tried to dress up as his mom to buy alcohol. And that was just like, whoa, like, and that was, to age myself, um, late 90s, early 2000s. Um, but like people just laughed at it. But that was not to enter a sacred space, so to speak. Um, and that was like, he literally just put on like an overcoat and a wig. Like, I don't remember if it worked or not, but it was like, very low effort. What a cis male in high school might think to do. Like, oh, I'm not going to do makeup because that's gay. But I just want alcohol, just low effort, see if it works. But I think for cis people, hello out there, um, it might be good for us to kind of like list the things. There's like certain milestones in a trans person's life. And I'm going to just stick with trans femmes here because that's what I am. There's certain milestones in a trans femme's journey, um, that kind of, I guess, add up to passing, so to speak. Um, and if this is the first episode, maybe you're finding us for the first time. Maybe this is your first trans podcast. Um, and hello, welcome. Great. I'm so happy to be one of the first trans people to like really talk to you. But I wanted to talk about the things that go into passing because again, this whole bathroom issue is the story of passing. Because if we all just looked and sounded like cis women, and some of us do, um, then there wouldn't be an issue. I'm sure there's plenty of trans women out there who use the women's bathroom day in, day out, and cause no issues. But let's touch on those things. So, um, I think one of the first things that a trans femme will learn how to do on their journey to passing is makeup. Right?
I would say so. I mean,
Yeah,
for me, that was the first thing I kind of dabbled in and wanted to gain experience,
right.
was makeup. And yeah, I mean, I think I would imagine for a lot of trans femmes, that's where they would start.
Yeah. I mean, I think many of us started just throwing on some femme clothes and seeing how we felt about it. But like that's relatively simple. Like, yes, it costs money to buy femme clothes, sure. But you put their clothes, you just put them on and you're kind of done. Whereas makeup is a ongoing process. It is a um, it's an art form. It's a skill that you have to develop over time. Like, yeah, we're lucky to live in the age of um, YouTube and TikTok, and we can find tutorials for things. Um, and maybe some of us have female friends or other femme friends who have the skills and they can kind of teach us and pass things along. But even so, even with all that help, makeup is still difficult. I've been doing it for couple years now, and I get compliments on it, but I'm still like, oh wow, I wish I could do like that. I look at other girls and I was like, oh, I wish I could nail that contouring. There's always so much to learn, like any other art form, like learning how to paint. That's essentially what it is. You're learning how to paint on your face. You are learning about the interplay of light and shadow on your face. You're learning to create a more feminine, I guess, rounded face. You're kind of like softening some features. Um, and that's just one thing. That's just makeup. And then there's um, facial hair, which is possibly the next battle for every trans femme out there, is learning how to maintain facial hair. And by that I mean either, well, get rid of it if you're a trans femme, if that's your thing, or if you're trans masc, getting it. But those are two very different stories. I'm going to just stick with trans femme here. And I would say most trans femmes, um, by and large, want to get rid of their facial hair. And that's a hard thing to do. I think that's kind of the first wall that a lot of trans femmes really hit. Because makeup, yes, it's a skill, but you know, as if you're lucky enough to have the money to go and buy makeup, or maybe you can receive some from some friends, it's a skill you can develop. You are not fighting against biology. With facial hair, you are fighting against biology. It's just something that your body does. Maybe you're lucky and it doesn't do it a lot. Maybe you're like me and once upon a time had a luxurious beard. Not, but it took a long time to get to the point that I'm at. Laser hair removal is expensive, as is electrolysis. Yes, you can shave every day, as many of us do, but the only real permanent solutions are electrolysis and laser. And those are both expensive, ongoing processes that can take years, frankly, depending on what you're dealing with biologically. It's an investment, it's time, and not all of us have those luxuries. And for me, that was definitely the first real hurdle of my story of passing. And I know you said, Alyssa, that you haven't had You haven't had laser yet or electrolysis?
Yeah, I haven't had either or. I'm still in that battle. I shave
Yeah.
twice a day. I want to get laser.
Hmm.
For me, I was told that my hair's too light for laser, and I might have to do electrolysis, which is much more expensive, and it also hurts twice as bad.
It
So
does. I think that's important to mention is how much of transition can not just financially hurt, but physically hurt. There's so many things, and I'm sure if there's any cis women out there listening, they're immediately thinking, well, honey, beauty is pain, and that's a lesson we learn very quickly. Just like plucking your eyebrows, that's pain. Shaving your body, nicking yourself, that's pain. Um, and laser and electrolysis, those are painful processes. Um, I will say with electrolysis, it's more permanent because you're physically removing the hair and its follicle, depending on where it is in the cycle. Um, but there's trade offs with both of them. However, both of them are expensive. Um, you can buy packages sometimes. I'm sure you've done your research, Alyssa, but like sometimes there's Groupons, depending on where you go. Um, or you can just buy packages. Sometimes they're running deals. Usually, if you're a first time customer, where I still go, if you're a first time customer, they offer you a package. Like you can buy many sessions ahead of time and save some money. But that costs hundreds of dollars. Like not everyone has those options. And if you don't have the money to do either of those things, you are stuck with shaving, um, which luckily is a thing you can do every day relatively cheaply, but it's it's hard. Like just because you can shave doesn't mean you get rid of your shadow, as we call it. And then you have to buy a color corrector to hide that shadow. And throughout the day, like you're kind of almost like um, Cinderella. You're worried about turning into a pumpkin at midnight, you know? And I remember early on when I used to go out and dance the night away and be like, oh, like I'd have to go into the bathroom and feel my face. Like even if no one else could see it, I wanted to go in and check and be like, okay, I think we've got like another hour left, and then I gotta go. Like all of a sudden I'm gonna be like Sasquatch, and it's just gonna like poof into existence. Um, it's not, but that is something that I had to consider. Um, and then there's I think the one of the like the biggest things that a trans person can go through is surgery, and that is a long process of time, effort, and money. And not everyone has that magical combination of all of those things. And depending on what state you live in, it can be a wildly different process. It can it can be shorter, it can be longer, it can be more difficult, it can be less difficult. It really very much depends. And it's I know it's hard to wrap your mind around if you've never had to go through it. But, I was very lucky to have my transition, my two surgeries that I really wanted taken care of. I was very lucky to have those taken care of within a relatively short period of time, just I think like 5 months or so. And that is something that can be hard to attain, you know? And I wish it was something that was easy, but it's not. It is. I made a video of this a while back. Maybe I'll share it at some point. Um, I actually have a video transition diary that I have been doing since before I came out. Um, and in those videos, I talk about many of these things that I've had to go through, or, long ago, looking forward to going through. And then now looking back at those videos and saying, like, wow, like that was really tough to go through, but I got through it. And I have to remind myself that I have had privilege, even within the demographic of trans women, that I've had the privilege to be able to do those things that other trans women really have to struggle to get, or won't get for a long time, or have much bigger barriers. Like, things have changed wildly in certain states. In the Northeast, not that long ago, you had to be like basically proving that you were transitioning physically and mentally for a good handful of years. Women who are my age but went through this earlier, they had to basically prove that they're trans. Whereas I have been much luckier where I kind of did. Like, I had to have letters from my therapist and my doctor, but like they were totally on board. They weren't, pushing back really. And I had things taken care of relatively fast, but I know that's not the same in other states. Anyways, I could talk about that all day. The point is that there are so many things that go into passing that I don't think cis people, think about. You think like, oh, just, like you said, Alyssa, put in the effort. And I think there are certain things you can do to make yourself as femme as possible, or as femme as you want to be. Um, but there are things that you may not have access to, either at all or right now. And I just want people to keep that in mind and ask themselves, okay, Al just listed all of these things, and that's not everything. I definitely skipped over some things, but I think I touched on the big ones. Um, there's all these things that Al just listed. And are these things that I would go through if I wasn't trans, just to get into the opposite gender's bathroom? No, you wouldn't go through a extremely painful recovery of a surgery. Like, to be graphic, you would not have your face peeled off and your face bones shaven just to enter a woman's bathroom. If you do, well, I mean, honey, you're already trans then. You had the surgery. If you're going that far to prove a point, guess what? You're you're trans. And to think about it another way, if you're worried about people who are sexually attracted to women entering the women's bathroom, how do you know how many lesbians are entering the women's bathroom? You don't know. You don't know someone's sexual identity by staring at them. I mean, okay, maybe sure. Maybe some people walk around with, rainbow flags as capes. And that's totally cool if that's your thing. And people can be like, okay, there's a good chance they're gay. But by and large, you can't look at a person and say, they're definitely gay. Like the way that he ties his tie, that half Windsor knot, definitely gay. Like, just ain't gonna happen. So if trans women, or sorry, I should say, if cis men don't go through all these steps that trans women do to become women, and in a way earn our womanhood, and you're afraid of us being in your bathroom, then really what you're afraid of is men. You're afraid of cis men. And I think that that side of the argument who argues that we are just men in drag don't want to confront the reality that they are afraid of their perceived protectors. Like, you kind of have Munchausen syndrome. And that might be a hot take, but when you distill the argument down to its essence, what that's what we're talking about. And that's just my opinion. But there might be some listeners out there who have a different opinion, and maybe at some point we'll hear from you and we can have a discussion on that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's true though. I mean, you're not afraid of us. You're afraid of men, because, and I just want to state this before I end up forgetting about it, because I feel like, most of this podcast. I know obviously you brought up some points on it, so I think maybe we might be in the clear. But I feel like a lot of people are going to say like, well, the whole time you're only really talking about the trans femme side. What about trans mask? But you kind of covered on it a little bit. But I just want to say we're not saying that if you're not trans femme that you can't utilize that space. We're not saying anybody can't. We're just trying to state our take on what would be the general uh, idea, and effort that you may want to put in if you don't want to have any backlash or anything like that within those spaces. But I definitely do want to make that kind of clarification that we're not saying that trans masked people can't use the women's restrooms. um, I mean, maybe in that kind of thing, maybe like facial hair and things like that, you still might want to get rid of, but that doesn't mean that you can't still present more on the fem mask. And it's just, for one, we're both trans women. So we are going to speak on the side that we understand the best. But I did want to make that clarification that we're not silencing that group, of trans women, because there is trans mask and there is trans femme.
Mm-hmm.
We just happen to be on the femme side of it, so we tend to understand that a bit more. But I think you can still, let's just say you're on the trans mask side, you can still take some of the things that we, you know, kind of went over and kind of apply that to you as well. Maybe not the makeup side if you don't want to wear makeup. Not all women wear makeup. But I think there's some other things that you can still kind of put into play. And
Mm-hmm.
another thing too, and this is something that, me and Elle kind of already talked about a little bit. But I do actually want to try to help other trans femme women who might not be, I'm rich by no means, but I do think that we can build a community of people, who want to donate like unused, unexpired makeup products that they don't use. I know for me, I myself have probably plenty of makeup products that I bought thinking I'd love or that I would use, and I just didn't. They're not expired. They're not used. I would totally be okay donating a lot of those, and putting those forth into whatever we utilize as like the way of, people receiving that. I do want to say that, we're not just talking about these things. We want to make it easier on other people, who might not be as fortunate, enough to go buy all this stuff. Because I know for me, I'm not rich, but I still at least make enough where I can afford what I need and do what I need. But I understand everyone's story looks a little bit different financially. So while we might be saying things like, makeup's a good avenue, um, you know, kind of dip your toes, watch, hop on YouTube Academy and, learn what you can. But I understand that it's not always easy for those. So we definitely kind of want to put together some sort of program. Maybe it's a Google form or something you fill out, answer a couple questions, and then we can kind of approve you and go from there. But you know, this whole podcast and, everything isn't so much to just say all these things and then not deliver help items. You know, we want to put forth those help items as well. Yeah. So ultimately, I think we're pretty much going to close it out where we're at right now. But you know, of course, obviously, we have a couple, you know, not couple, but we have more episodes, of course, to follow this. And yeah, I think this has definitely been a good first, you know, episode here. And I definitely thank everybody for tuning in, whether you are on the video side and you're watching us, or you're on the just listener side and you're getting the audio side of it. We definitely, you know, appreciate you tuning in, and hopefully you were, you know, whether you're cis or you are part of the community, hopefully you were able to pull something from this. And yeah, hopefully you can, you know, watch each episode and learn even more on these other topics.
Hopefully, we've been somewhat informative. And thanks for listening to us talk on the inaugural episode, I guess you could say. And I'd like to thank Alyssa for putting this together and having me.
Of course. Yeah, glad to have you. But yeah, if you enjoyed this and you want to watch the next one, then you know, stay tuned, and there should be some sort of announcement on when the next episode is. But thank you for your time.
Have a good one, everyone.